This is a great question because let's talk about how our government is funded, who's paying for student loans, who's paying for student loan forgiveness, how does this all work? So, let's break it down here. The Department of Education lends out about $100 billion in new student loans every single year, and that's been growing a little bit every single year. When they actually need to lend, the Department of Education doesn't just have $100 billion. They reach out to the Department of Treasury, and the Department of Treasury gives them $100 billion. Well, where does the Department of Treasury get that money from? Well, just like all other financing of the US government, everything we spend from Medicare to the Department of Defense to all the grants and all the programs, we do it by issuing treasury bonds. Treasury bonds are investments that the government borrows money from people, usually you, me, mutual funds, hedge funds, other governments, and they pay interest for borrowing that money. And that interest rate ranges from like next to nothing from loans from the pandemic to 4 or 5% today. And so the Department of Treasury will issue a bond, and then they will give the Department of Education $100 billion, and the Department of Education can then make loans with that money. So when student loans are issued, they go to all the individual people, and when we repay our student loans, it goes back to the Department of Education. Anything that is any interest and any money that's made is used to pay for the Department of Education expenses. It's used to pay for their other programs, pay the loan servicers. And if there is ever a profit, they go back to the US taxpayer and the Department of Treasury and pays down our deficit. But guess what? There's never a profit. Student loans are not profitable. They cost the government money every single year. It is just an expense. Now, granted, it's not a lot. They do basically break even, but like lose a little bit of money all the time. And then we get to loan forgiveness. The Department of Education forgives about $1 billion in student loans every single year. That's from public service loan forgiveness, death and disability, all the different programs. And that is pretty darn consistent. We forgive $1 billion in student loans, we loan $100 billion, and the government makes up, borrows another $1 to $2 trillion in loans. So when the Department of Education side is forgiven or canceled, nobody really owns the debt. It is wiped from the record. However, that old treasury bond, we are still paying interest on as taxpayers because that bond still exists. And until that bond is repaid, the interest will be paid out. And that's just like how everything works in our government system. So right now, the deficit's like $35 trillion, and we're paying interest on that for all the different things that we've paid for as a country. And that will continue to be paid for until those bonds are all paid off over time, including the little bit of loan forgiveness every single year. So what the secretary is saying is, well, technically the US taxpayers are paying for that loan forgiveness. And maybe that's a problem for you. Maybe it's not a problem for you. You can see the numbers right there and what we're forgiving and paying as US taxpayers, but it's no different than Pell Grants. It's no different than funding higher education directly, funding K-12 education directly. The money goes from the US Treasury, from our Treasury bonds, goes to all the different services, gets trickled down. Student loans pay a little bit back into the pot, but yes, there is some money forgiven. The Department of Education's not holding anyone accountable for it, but we as taxpayers are still paying interest on the treasury bonds that were originally issued for that. And so that goes back to the bigger spending equation. I hope that makes sense because this is how the financing system works. I know it's a lot of arrows going back and forth, but I hope that helps explain a little bit of what the nuance is here. When people say that there's no such thing as forgiveness, well, this is kind of why, but that's definitely a misnomer from an individual standpoint. Individual forgiveness. Public policy standpoint, it's a system, and that's how the system works. As always, please like, subscribe, and follow, and we'll bring you the latest on higher education news.